Will the Lord be with you? Our sermon passage for this morning comes from the book of 2 Kings chapter 5, and it can be found on page 293 in your pew Bible if you'd like to follow along. It's the story of the healing of Naaman. Now Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Aram. And he was a great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. Now bands of raiders of Aram had gone out and had taken captive a young girl from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. And she said to her mistress, "If only my master Naaman would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." Naaman went to his master, the king, and he told him what the girl from Israel had said. "By all means go," the king of Aram replied. "I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. The letter that he took to the king of Israel read, "With this letter, I am sending my servant Naaman to you so that you may cure him of his leprosy." As soon as the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his robes and he said, "Am I God? Can I kill and bring back to life? Why does this fellow send someone to me to be cured of his leprosy? See how he is trying to pick a quarrel with me." When Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his robes, he sent him this message: "Why have you torn your robes? Have the man come to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman went with his horses and chariots, and he stopped at the door of Elisha's house. And Elisha sent a messenger out to him to say, "Go and wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be cleansed." But Naaman went away angry, and he said, "I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, wave his hand over the spot, and cure me of my leprosy. Are not Abana and Parphor, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Couldn't I wash in one of those rivers and be made well?" So he turned and went off in a rage. Naaman's servants went to him and said, "My father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then when he tells you, 'Wash and be cleansed'?" So Naaman went down and he dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, as the man of God had told him. And his flesh was restored and became clean like that of a young boy. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Towering over the Chicago skyline sits the Willis Tower, formerly and more famously known as the Sears Tower. For years, it reigned as the tallest building in the world. I believe now it sits at number 12, which is still pretty impressive. It takes 60 seconds to take the elevator from the bottom all the way up to the top. Have any of you done this in recent years? Yes? There's this thing there, so we just went this past Friday. There's this thing at the top of the tower called the Sky Ledge. And no joke, it is a ledge. It's like a balcony, but made of glass. And you wait in another line, and you step out onto the Sky Ledge, and literally you're standing on glass, and there's glass all around you. And you wait in line for this thing, and you're so excited for it. And then when you actually have to take a step out onto the glass, it just took me a minute. My girls, of course, thought it was great. Madeline did a handstand. Last night I found out, though, by the way, that recently the glass has cracked at one point. Still safe, apparently, but it has cracked. You're at about floor 95 when you do this, and the only thing to do when you're up there is to look out and to look down. And it is quite something. Now, just outside Chicago, just off the Dan Ryan Expressway, is another Sears Tower. Maybe you didn't know this. It's a low brick building that spans a neighborhood block, but in a corner of the building, a 4-story tower in one corner tries to loom up, and there's the word Sears written across the tower. Towering over, or of sorts, neighboring brownstones and convenience stores. It was our favorite joke as kids. Driving into Chicago, my dad would inevitably say, within almost sight of the real Sears Tower, we would pass the little Sears Tower, and he would say, "There it is, you guys, the Sears Tower. Anybody want to go to the top?" Like clockwork, every single time. Now, in 2015, Sears sold the name of the Sears Tower to be renamed the Willis Tower. But the tiny Sears Tower lived on. Well, until 2018, when Sears closed all of its Chicagoland locations, and the metaphor totally breaks down. But stay with me for just a moment. The more I thought about these two buildings as we took the train into Chicago on Friday, the more I thought about its alignment with today's passage. A tall and mighty figure, and a low and lowly servant. See, everything in that culture was top down or looking down. From mighty Naaman came order and rule and reign. He was second in command. The king would tell him what to do, and pretty much every order went out from Naaman. But in terms of social positioning, Naaman was the Sears Tower, and the servant girl in his household was the little Sears Tower. We don't even know what she's called. Like 91% of the other women in Scripture, she is not even given a name. But she is a key player in this passage. And yet how sad that she is only referred to in reference to somebody else, or really in reference to two other people. She is Naaman's wife's servant. 3 tiers, 90 stories, and a world apart from Naaman to Naaman's wife's servant. But in this series called Childlike, a series where we've looked at passages that center around children and teach us to be more like them, she is our star. And she really is a star, even though so little about her is known. The text hands us only 2 sentences about her. Verse 2 in particular is heart-wrenching. It's listed and given to us simply as fact, but there's no way to read it without feeling the pain behind it. Now, the Arameans on one of their raids had taken a young girl captive from the land of Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. She was taken, carried off, a captive of war, away from her family and friends into this foreign land with foreign people. The author makes a point to list one descriptive category about her. She is given one adjective, and it's the word young. She is a young girl, not a young woman. The text points out that she is a young girl. Can you imagine? The story behind verse 2, we cannot know the pain and the agony that's behind it, but there it is sitting there with us. All we do know is that she had brought with her from Israel faith in God, faith in a healing and mighty God who had not left her. The verse that follows, verse 2, speaks to this, or really she speaks to this. And she says, "If only my Lord were with the prophet in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." She speaks with confidence and boldness. She doesn't suppose or guess or speculate or suppose. She says Elijah would cure him. Her words remind me so much of a child's gentle confidence, that beautiful childlike impulse to speak with declarative sentences, not doubtful ones. You know the ones that say the sun will come out tomorrow and that somewhere over the rainbow and that you should consider yourself at home. Her childlike assertion is compelling, and it makes its way through her mistress all the way to Naaman. And Naaman acts on it. But if the girl's words are childlike, there is plenty more in this passage that is childish. And not surprisingly, those responses come from the adults in the form of 2 royal tantrums. So Naaman sets off for Samaria, but this is a dude that doesn't know exactly how to travel light. He's not exactly a minimalist. This guy brings with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of garments. And Naaman arrives at the king's house, knocks on the door, and presents him with all of these gifts. But instead of being grateful, what does the king do? Tantrum number 1. He tears his clothes because he is so distraught. It seems like a bit of an exaggeration to me. My friend Nancy told the story once from her childhood. She and her brothers were all dressed and ready for church, and they were horsing around a little bit too much. Nancy got really mad, and she grabbed at her brother's shirt, and she pulled down, and it ripped in 2 places, just right down the middle. So her brother ran off to go tell their mom as fast as possible, and Nancy knew she had to think fast. So what did she do? She ripped her own dress right down the front, ran to her mom and said, "He started it and he ripped my dress." That, my friends, is childish, not childlike. And it's exactly what the king did. Now, you can kind of understand why he maybe did this, because the very presentation of these gifts to the king did put Naaman in a bit of a bind. It did put the king in a bit of a bind, because the king could not refuse the gift. It would be like a new bride and groom refusing a wedding gift. You cannot do that. By accepting the gift and not curing the leprosy, the king would violate the required social responsibility. And this put the relationship between the 2 countries, which was volatile on a good day, at risk. Hence the tearing of the garments and then the exclamation, "Am I God to give death or life, that this man sends word to me to cure a man of his leprosy? Just look and see how he's trying to pick a quarrel with me." The king of Israel thinks that this is some sort of elaborate plot to pick a fight and really start a war between the 2 countries. But the king was in no mood for a war. He couldn't accept the gift without indeed curing Naaman, but he had no idea how he was going to cure him of his leprosy. And so he tears his clothes. But good thing, by the way, because Naaman had brought him 10 extra sets of garments, so he had some other things to choose from. Thankfully, Elisha intervenes, and he tells the king to send Naaman to him. Now, when he arrives, what's interesting is that Elisha refuses to even come out of his house. Elisha seems like he's a big delegator. First, he delegates somebody to go to the king, and now, even at his own house, he sends a messenger, or really a servant, to go out to give Naaman an instruction. Really, to take a bath 7 times. Cue tantrum number 2. Naaman has traveled many miles to Israel with this affliction. He's assembled this vast payment, and he's diverted from the royal palace to the house of the prophet. And now, the prophet won't even come out of his own house, but instead sends a servant with a 1-sentence instruction. An instruction that is too simple, too mundane, and too humiliating for him to even try. Go take a bath, Naaman. Actually, go take 7. Now, I'm used to hearing protests against taking baths. They usually just come from my children. Here is Naaman, a mighty general, pretty much throwing a tantrum because he doesn't want to take a bath. And so he starts back to his country without even trying. Naaman's servants gently persuade the general, and finally he yields. And in verse 14, he goes down to the Jordan and he washes 7 times, and his flesh was restored like the flesh of a young boy, and he was made clean. There was no pomp, no circumstance, no smoke, no poof. There was barely a prophet. Instead, there were 3 servants, 10 sets of clothes, 7 baths, and a partridge in a pear tree. No, wait. Instead, there was God who was there the entire time. God who was there when the servant girl was captured, there when she was prompted to tell Naaman's wife how her husband could be made well, there when Naaman set off for Samaria, there to tell Elisha what to tell Naaman to do. God was there all along, using not the powerful, but the weak to be instruments of truth and wisdom. And while the powerful were childish, the weak were childlike. 3 different times in this passage when the lower and the weaker character give wisdom to the powerful, the servant girl, the servant of Elisha, and the servants of Naaman, God chooses to speak through the lowly to the lofty, from the little tower to the big tower. And centuries later, God chose his greatest spokesperson in his own son. And he began, as we all do, as a child. And he remained a humble presence his entire life, and he never lost what it is to be childlike. He spoke truth to power no matter what the cost. He spoke with gentle confidence about his Abba Father, and he invited all of us to know him as well. Being childlike requires a clarity of vision, that no matter what happens, we keep our eyes firmly planted on God. This young girl has been uprooted from her home, taken to a new land, and probably not given much choice on what she is to do every day, but she remains convinced that God is a healing and active God. She is childlike. Naaman is the commander of an army who lives in a comfortable home, goes to a new land, and is asked to do one thing and throws a complete fit. Naaman is childish. Paul says it best in 1 Timothy 4:12. Do not let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for the believers in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity. I think that's pretty good advice no matter what our age. The other night we were at our fellowship summer dinner group, and we were settling into a nice conversation, and our kids had been shown this lovely little kids table in the kitchen, but my daughter Madeline has never been one for the kids table. And so she asked if they could squeeze into the end of the table next to me. And that's exactly what happened. And the hosts they were so lovely about it. And I'm kind of like, flinching a little bit, like, come on. But anyway, they went with it, and we wound up all around the same table, and it was just lovely. At the end of the meal, Madeline chimes in and says, hey, everybody, let's go around and each share our most embarrassing moment. And my first thought was, right now is actually kind of up there. I don't know these folks very well, but, okay. And that's exactly what happened. People went around and shared their most embarrassing moment, and I would imagine that more things were shared at that table than would have been had she not asked that prompting question. The beautiful thing about kids is that they're not old enough to realize when a question might not be appropriate. And at that moment, it was the most appropriate question. It broke the ice in this beautiful way, and people shared things again that they probably would not have shared. We adults would have gone on talking about the beautiful day and the wonderful food and all those things. But it broke through to another layer of conversation that was really a lovely thing. That's what it is to be childlike, to not worry about social structures, but to speak out and to say things no matter the cost, because kids don't think about the cost. They just speak, and sometimes, friends, they are prophets. And that's what this girl is in this passage. She is a prophet, along with Elisha. Yes, she points to the prophet, but both of them point to God in a beautiful way, and they speak out to power and to truth, knowing that they could get in trouble for it. But God intends this all for good. That's what it means to be childlike. To disregard power structures, to run headlong into difficult situations, to offer beautiful wisdom without any regard to what might not be proper. It means faith wins over fear, truth over tantrums, right over might. It means staring down a 110-story building and not even blinking. That's what it is to be childlike. Now, at the end of this passage, Naaman himself becomes a little bit more childlike. After all, the passage says that his skin becomes like that of a young boy. Perhaps his healing transformation brought about another sort of transformation, one where his inside would start to reflect his outside, one where he would set aside his childish impulses and seek out what it means to be childlike. My friends, may we have the courage and the boldness and the faith to do the same. Let's pray. Gracious God, we thank you for your servant, this young girl. We know that she had a name, and we know that you know her name. And we lift her up to you in thanksgiving, that we follow behind her in her example to speak out with a childlike faith that speaks up, that is bold, that is prophetic, and that proclaims your glory and your healing power today and every day. May we grow to be more like her each and every day. Amen.